Good morning, everybody. This is Alan Natachu, Learning Experience Designer with Madison Area Technical College in Madison, Wisconsin, bringing on a special guest. I am super psyched to introduce John to TLDC Chat.
Hello.
So, hi. Hello, everybody. John, can you introduce yourself and give us a backstory of how you got into the training and development world?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. I've been very excited about this. I've been watching and following along with previous events, and it's very exciting. Very grateful to be here and for this opportunity. And as questions come up, just feel free to ask at any time. We can keep this really informal. But my background is originally in architecture. My wife and I both have master's degrees in architecture and met in architecture school. And I actually did my master's thesis on the use of virtual reality in architectural applications back in 2000. So it was a long time ago, and virtual reality wasn't really accessible at that time. There were a few headsets that like NASA had, and they were $1 million, and they were low resolution and low latency. And they were doing some very exciting things, but there was no practical way for me to get my hands on the technology at the time. And so I started kind of getting interested in the idea that virtual worlds could also be applicable to architecture, and started following along with MMOs and things like EverQuest, where there were multiple people working together to play the game, and they were coming together from all over the world, and they were navigating these very large, complex environments. And I thought, if they can do this to navigate a dungeon and slay orcs, why couldn't it be multiple stakeholders to visualize a building design? And I became very interested in that possibility. And at the time, again, like VR, there was no accessible technology. There were very complex game engines. Most of the studios were writing their own engines, and there wasn't anything accessible. So around 2006, I found out about Second Life and this world where you could create your own content, and it was multiplayer. There was people from all over the world in there. So I became very interested in that and started using Second Life for architectural applications, and continued to follow along with that for a number of years until around the time that Palmer Luckey posted a video of this prototype duct tape kit, VR kit that he was working on in his garage. And I knew right away what that was, and I wanted to be a part of it. So I became one of the earliest backers of the Oculus Rift EK1 Kickstarter campaign, and got that headset, and just really immediately understood that this was going to revolutionize not just architecture, but multiple industries. It was a very exciting, even though it was, very low resolution and we had to use Xbox controllers to navigate, I could see where it was going, and wanted to be a part of it. So we were practicing residential design at the time. And so we were using architectural modeling tools like Revit and AutoCAD. And so one of the first things I did was started to bring those Revit models into Unity, and learned the Unity engine, and started to publish those VR applications online. And because in the early, the few of us who can remember the early DK1 days, there was no content, there were no games, there was nothing to do. And we all had these really cool headsets, and there was nothing to do. So people were downloading these architectural models and walking around and giving us feedback. And we started getting a lot of interest from others that were interested in bringing their architectural models into virtual reality. And so we started getting increasingly large-scale applications to do visualizations of very large buildings. One of the first ones was an NBA arena for the Sacramento Kings, which it couldn't have been a more complex undertaking at the time. I mean, we were talking about, this was 5 years ago. Unity was a lot earlier than it is right now, and the VR technology was just beginning, but we did it. We got it into VR, and they were able to make use of it, and saw that there was so much potential for this. So we started Arch Virtual, and that was dedicated exclusively to the use of virtual reality to solve real-world problems. And that's kind of how we got started in the VR space, and how Arch Virtual originated. And I don't know if I should just keep on rambling on with my intro. This is not really an intro. This is sort of like me getting into my whole story here. But
Oh, we love stories here. Go for
okay,
it.
good. Well, why don't I share my screen at this point, because there's some of these things are going to be helpful to explaining this. So let's see if I can share my screen. Where do I click to share? Is it share up on the top?
Yep. Move your mouse above your head, and you should see a share icon or a share button.
Oh, there it is. Got it.
And then you should be using Google Chrome. If you haven't installed the share plugin, it just takes a moment to walk through that process, and then boom, screen sharing. There we go.
Excellent. So this is one of those this is kind of back in earlier in my story, but these very complex high-end VR systems early on. And this was the Second Life days where this was actually a project we did in Second Life called Studio Wikitecture, where we had people from all over the world collaborating on architectural designs using what we called this wiki tree. And so people could submit ideas for a design challenge that we were working on and sort of iterate on those designs very much like you can in a wiki, in text-based wiki. But this was a 3D wiki where we were working on, one of the projects we did was a telemedicine or a medical clinic in Nepal, and it was an international architectural competition, and we decided to use the wiki tree to design it. And we had, I think it was like 30 people from all over the world contributing ideas, and most of them, I don't think any of them were architecturally trained, but they worked together and they iterated on this design using, by submitting their designs to this wiki tree. And we actually won the Founders Award in third place overall from entries from all over the world. And it was a very exciting time. And I saw there's so much potential for the technology. And then getting to the DK1. So that's me, the very moment that I put on the DK1 and had a Revit model in there. And then again, starting Arch Virtual dedicated to this. So on the right, you see Boogie Cousins at the time was the star player of the Sacramento Kings. So we actually scanned him into 3D, and he meets the visitors at center court in VR. And you really get the sense of how tall he is. And he greets you, you can give him a high five, and you get to see the new arena. And so it was very effective for like fans and players to get excited about that new construction project. And now, of course, it's been built and it's been in use now for, I think, a couple of years. And then we did a lot of architectural projects, and then started getting into other applications in other industries. So medical, manufacturing, safety training, recognizing a lot of different opportunities across a lot of different industries. And around this time, we started doing medical applications. So it started with medical visualization from the architectural side again, doing operating rooms and clinic spaces and head wall configurator apps for hospitals, and started to sort of understand that the medical industry has specific pain points that VR addresses directly. And there was so much opportunity there to visualize these spaces. And one of the early ones was a hospital on the East Coast that was about to construct, I think it was like 15 operating rooms, and the architect had already designed it, and the hospital sent us these blueprints, and we replicated it in virtual reality and created a multi-user application where the doctors and surgeons and nurses were able to get together in virtual reality and look at the operating space before they built it. And lo and behold, they caught a bunch of errors. There were problems with the design, and so they gave us a whole spreadsheet of things that they wanted changed in the model, and we made modifications, changed it, sent it back, and we went through this process several times of iteration until they got it just right, and then they built it in the real world. And they were able to ensure that operating space is exactly as they need it before they broke ground. And that was a real eye-opener for me. And similarly for head wall configurators, we did an application for Mortensen Construction. And the challenge there for designing these head walls is there's a lot at stake to get these things right. And the way they do it right now is they fly everybody in, and they get into a warehouse space effectively, and they build prototypes out of styrofoam and cardboard and plywood, and they use sticky notes to mark things up. And it's very expensive, it's very complex, it's very time consuming. So we were able to build a virtual reality application where these stakeholders could just put on a headset, and it was multi-user, so they could be anywhere in the world, and they could get together and they could design a head wall, and they could compare different ideas and export that back out to the architectural drawing so that they could build it as they had configured it in VR.
Before we continue, what's a head wall?
A head wall is so if you've ever been in a hospital room, there's the hospital bed, and then at the head of the bed, there's all the med gas and suction, and all the different equipment is attached to that wall, the end of the wall. So that's called a head wall. And getting the design of that right is really important, because as you can imagine, in an ICU or any kind of urgent situation, the nurses and the doctors don't want to have to be fumbling around trying to reach things, or they can't get to something, or they have to extend a cord, or there's a power cord that's in the wrong location, and there's just a lot at stake. And they build, hundreds of these spaces, and every one of them has a head wall. And so that was the configuration application that we had built.
Oh, nice.
And so as people were seeing these medical applications, we were approached by Adtalem Global Education to do an airway management application in VR. And this was the first real medical simulation project that we had ever done, where it's actual hands-on anatomical. It wasn't just an architectural project. It was actually working with a human and teaching a specific clinical skill. And so this was a whole new world for us. And this was about 2.5 years ago. And we had the opportunity to work with a subject matter expert on this, Dr. Eric B. Bauman, who's been our friend and collaborator in SME on a lot of our medical projects, and really saw a lot of opportunity for how this technology could be used to give students access to a technique that's very risky and very challenging, and it's very difficult to do. In reality, you can currently use mannequins to simulate it, but this VR application let people go in and do the head tilt, chin lift, and all the different techniques that are involved with airway management. And we won the Best in Show award at the Medical Simulation and Healthcare Conference with that application. And that sort of led the way to a lot of other medical applications, working with GE Healthcare on their Pristina. On the top left, there's an image of that. They have engineers all over the world and sales reps all over the world. So being able to use the multi-user feature of VR in our technology to be able to visualize these products, to collaborate on the design and be able to demonstrate how they work. This is a fully functional machine. You could actually rotate it and move it around and interact with it. And a company called Envision Experience approached us to do first it was a laceration repair, and then we did a long bone fracture reduction, which you can see in the bottom images. And in this application, it was really about exposing high school students to what it would be like to pursue a career in healthcare. And so we put them in the operating room. They're working directly with a surgeon. We used motion capture technology to get a very lifelike surgeon that walks up and talks to you about the procedure and teaches you how to do it. And it's multi-user, so you can have several people together learning. And this was really how we got started in medical simulation. And I should just stop there. I'm not, because I'm following my screen, I'm not able to see chat. So I don't know.
All right, so you can get a question, and we got a long distance hello. John Westra says,
oh, hi, John.
Val from SL says hello.
Hello.
And he has a question. Do you believe virtual design and prototyping is currently the best business ROI use case for VR today?
I think it's probably one of the top. There's a lot of use cases emerging, but that is very potent because of the expense and complexity of doing it in reality. I would say that's a very, very powerful application of VR technology for sure.
All right, thanks. If any other people have questions, feel free to post them in the chat. I can mark them as a question, or use the Ask the Question button. It's located right, at least on my screen, it's right there. It might be somewhere else on your screen, but it's at the bottom of the screen.
So I guess as we started to do medical simulation, I started to get a lot more familiar with how medical simulation is currently done in medical schools and nursing schools, training paramedics and EMTs. It's a vitally important part of the medical process and medical education process, because it's the one chance that students have to get out of the classroom and get into a situation that simulates what they're actually going to be doing on the job. And most of the time, like a vast majority of the time in medical school, you're looking at it's videos, it's textbooks, it's lectures, it's not hands-on. But then when you get in the field, it's a very different kind of experience. And medical simulation is really important, and it's been proven many times over the efficacy of medical simulation for preparing students for real-world situations. And so that's where I started to realize, that's why I think the medical simulation industry is so eager and interested to explore the use of virtual reality, because it's really all about immersing students in real-world situations. But the challenge is that, medical simulation, they're using plastic mannequins, which is really the best technology. It's the gold standard right now for medical simulation, because it allows the students to really kind of feel as if they're working with a patient. But the challenge is they're not exactly very lifelike. A lot of times, they look like a plastic doll. Even though they're very effective for this, it's very expensive. There's a lot of challenges with accessibility because of that expense. A lot of simulation, there's a lot of schools that don't have access to high-end medical simulation. And these mannequins, some of the high fidelity ones can cost up to $200,000 or more, and medical sim labs can cost millions of dollars, and even the simplest medical sim centers are $100,000 or more. So there's an accessibility and affordability challenge with medical simulation that I think VR can really address. So we really became very focused on this space in the medical field, kind of pivoting a little bit away from architecture. We still do a lot of architectural work, but the medical space became very interesting for those reasons. And one of the sort of genesis moments, and I'm getting to the training platform that we're building that I'd like to talk about, but one of the early moments of insight was we were working in it was in the basement of a fire department in Madison, and the town of Madison. And our SME, Dr. Eric Bauman, was showing us how to do one of these clinical procedures. And the way that VR development works right now is, at least in our case, we work with an SME, a subject matter expert, and I was like scrambling to record as much video of this demonstration as I could, because Dr. Bauman is very, very intelligent. He's going through a lot of in-depth information, and our job is going to be to capture this information and spend the next 6 to 9 months building a VR application that effectively simulates what Dr. Bauman is teaching us. So it's really important to capture this. So I was juggling like 3 different cameras. I had a Ricoh 360, Ricoh Theta 360. I had, our team was all there, and we were going through this procedure, and we had him go through it multiple times. And I started to think, like, I wish there was a better way to capture his expertise and knowledge that was a much more sort of one-to-one translation of his knowledge directly from his mind and his demonstration directly into VR, rather than this process of us spending $150,000 of our clients' money and 6 to 9 months of time. And at the end of that, we've got one application that does one thing one way. And the real challenge there is not just the expense, but it's just that everybody does things differently. And even though this application that we ended up building was very successful and people were very positive about it, everybody that took the headset off would say, wow, that was amazing. But, in my hospital, we do things a little differently. Like, I would have put a pillow under the patient's head, or our oxygen isn't on the wall behind us. Our oxygen is over on the right, and I wouldn't have wanted to reach over here, and I want to change that. And our scrubs are purple, not blue. This isn't how we do it. And, everybody wants it to be the way they do it. There's differences in how people do these techniques in every region of the world, every hospital does things a little differently. And even within a hospital, multiple physicians can do the same procedure different ways. And these differences are really important to them. And so when they have to go into VR and they're being trained to do something that's only one way, that's done by one subject matter expert, it's very limiting. And again, expensive, it's limiting in what you can do. And then if we ever want to customize that, if we ever want to change that application, any of you that are familiar with, writing code or building applications can attest to the fact that unpacking a project after it's been delivered and then trying to make even the slightest modification is very expensive. It's very time consuming. It's very challenging. And it's not something that the client can do. The end user can do. So that was kind of the situation with VR development. We saw it to be too expensive, too time consuming, and too complex. And also, because of those factors, the opportunities to use VR in medical simulation are very limited because of the fact that you need a specialized team of highly skilled, experienced developers to create these. And so you're really only able to capture a tiny sliver of what healthcare and medical training needs encapsulate. Like there's so many different facets. Like healthcare and medical are very complex industries with so many different areas that require training. And if it takes one team of experts, 6 to 9 months to build just one application that does one thing, you're leaving out the vast majority of what the medical and healthcare space needs. And so that's what led to Acadicus. Acadicus is our VR learning platform. It provides everything you need to be able to customize and create VR learning and content and courses. And the key point is that these are created by experts, created by instructors. We're really putting them in the driver's seat of creating these applications instead of us recording a video and then translating it into VR. So I'll stop there before I go any further. There's a video that we can watch from here, but I just want to see if there's other questions.
We don't have any questions right now.
Okay.
But all right, so I'm going to go ahead and load up that video. Which one is it? Is it the VR training or the teach and learn?
Teach and learn.
Okay. All right. So bear with me. This is an experiment. We're going to take over my face with a video.
Welcome to Acadicus. Today, we're going to be going over the Pediatric Airway Readiness Simulator. In this virtual reality immersive simulation, we'll go over some key components that will help get you ready for one of the most stressful pediatric procedures there is, airway intubation in a patient with impending respiratory failure. We'll go over all the equipment needed to instrument the airway, as well as some techniques for how the room should be set up to maximize your success.
We could put it right on the wall underneath your ophthalmoscope. So not only need our standardized size and drink.
In today's simulation scenario, we'll go over the proper setup for central venous catheter insertion. The catheter that we show here is a triple lumen central venous catheter. Now, as you can see, the wires as they come out of the kit have a J tip, and they have this guide, this blue dark guide on it. You slide the guide forward and you straighten out the J tip.
If we were to do this in real time, we would need several engine crews, several pieces of apparatus and ambulances. You can imagine it'd be quite time consuming and costly in terms of resource management. I now see one victim face down. Think back to your incident command 101. What is your primary goal?
So as I'm feeding that wire, I want to make sure someone's looking at the monitor and see if there's any PVCs or ectopy. Dilate that skin tract all the way down to the blood vessel, and I'm going to make it much easier for that central venous catheter to go.
One thing that we think about is not blocking our ambulances in so that they cannot accept patients and leave the scene rapidly. I can actually go inside the ambulance.
And remember, we're measuring from the corner of the mouth to the angle of the jaw. This one in my left hand would be way too big for this patient. This one in my right hand is perfect size.
You could customize a pump panel to have the pump panel look exactly as the pump panel did for your fire truck or your apparatus, your orientation training.
Interact with all the different pieces of equipment that I've shown you here. Try them all out. Practice with them. And then in the third level of the Acadicus, changing the environment, adding different pieces of equipment that you don't see here, things that you may use in your hospital, changing the scenario. I don't want it to be in the pediatric ICU. Maybe I'd like it to be in the emergency room because that's where I work. So Acadicus gives you all those options.
Sorry about that, folks. Little feedback there.
So yeah, so that video showed several snippets of actual instructors and SMEs that are in there able to create content, and there we go. So there's the next video. We might just show the next video right away because so that was sort of the end result, but the next video shows a little bit more clearly how this content is created and how you could also create content if you're interested in creating anything or instructing or creating your own simulations or even like a VR podcast. You can do that in Acadicus, and this next video shows more about how to do that.
All right, loading it up.
We can pick up our ultrasound again, and we can confirm with ultrasound view that the catheter is
Not
in the
this
vein.
one. There's a
Very easy to see it as a shadow.
Sorry, I'm sorry. The other, I forget the name of it.
The VR training one?
That's the one. Sorry. Yep.
Okay, no worries.
To create your own VR training with Acadicus, first choose a template setting. Then, add any props you need from the asset library. When you're ready, Acadicus can begin recording everything in your scene, including all voice and object interactions. Visitors you invite to your space in Acadicus can now watch your 3D recording. They can access your space in VR mode with an Oculus Rift or in non-VR on a Windows PC. To create your own VR training or to explore content created by others, visit Acadicus.com.
So a note on the avatars. I know there's a lot of people ask about the avatars and why are they wearing sunglasses and why do they look like cartoons, especially since there's so many more realistic avatar options out there. What we're using right now is just the Oculus's default avatar system, and quite frankly, we're using it because the price is right. It's free. We can just use that SDK in our application, and I wager that Facebook is going to be working very hard to make their avatars very realistic over time. And in fact, the next iteration that are currently out, we're currently working on integrating our expressive avatars where you don't have to have the sunglasses on anymore and you can actually have some expression and there's lip syncing. And so it's going to be a trajectory. I think that's going to be improving quickly. But for now, it's nice to be able to just get the avatar in. There's some evidence that suggests that having photorealistic avatars isn't necessary to the learning experience or to the efficacy of the learning experience. So as long as you're focusing on the task at hand, for now, it's the best we can do, but it'll be getting better over time.
Yeah, one of the things I tested out this system and had a really good interaction with it. And I totally forget about the avatar because I'm so immersed as to what's happening in front of me, interacting with the objects around me, trying not to fall because I'm still kind of getting used to VR and standing up.
Yep.
But we got a question from Mike. It's a technical question about the video. For this video, what is it built on? Unreal, Unity, or other?
Good question. It's Unity. So we use Unity as the backend for everything that we do as the engine. It's Unity is, I think it's like well over 80% of all VR applications are made with Unity. So we've used that as our backend engine.
Awesome. Thank you. So if there are any more questions, feel free to ask. But this has been really, really awesome learning more about Acadicus, and I am really excited about the potential. You have a lot of assets that come with your products. You can pick up and build and just lay out your entire hospital floor, EMT environment. Not crash course, but major, it's not course, it's a disaster, disaster situations, putting people in danger, putting people in charge of people's lives, but in a virtual reality experience. One of the coolest things that I got from visiting and participating in the space is that you could actually move around and mimic what the instructor's doing. You can slide into their space and look down and see what they're picking up and mimic as they're picking up and positioning. And yeah, I found that to be very, very useful, especially as one with the medical terminology, working with medical stuff. That's a real technical term. Knowing how all that works.
Yeah, there's definitely an efficiency to the movement of specific procedures where you really get a sense, from as we were developing it, none of us are on the development team are coming from a medical background. We depend on our medical advisors and our medical subject matter experts. And it was always immediately evident when we were doing demos when someone was in who knew what they were doing and someone was in who didn't. Because if somebody comes in who knows what they're doing, you can tell immediately in Acadicus that just the way that they approach their work and where they want things positioned and how they move, there's something about that really they're encapsulating a body of knowledge that comes across in their movements, and it's not something that's easily conveyed through video or a textbook or any other, even if a lecture you're watching somebody do it. But if you can go into VR and you feel that presence, and anybody that's not tried VR, I would highly encourage you to do so, and don't just stop at like a Gear VR or an Oculus Go. Definitely get a high-end experience with something like an HTC Vive or Windows Mixed Reality or Oculus Rift, and try it out, because you can watch these videos and think that you understand what it's like, but it's not really what it's actually like. The minute people put on the headset, that's what their first comment is, whoa, I had no idea it was like this. And being able to sort of stand face to face with an expert that's teaching you how to do something is a very immersive experience. It's a very rich kind of learning experience.
We got a couple of questions loaded up. This one's from Mark. What's the time frame to develop a simulation like the one demoed?
Good question. So we had, like I said, 6 to 9 months on most VR development applications is what we still do. I mean, when people want to hire us for an application, that's just the time frame for us to build it. But in Acadicus, the one most recently was a physician saw the Acadicus website, really wanted to get in. I told him, the hardware recommendations, the laptop and the Oculus Rift that he would need. He went out and bought it. And 1 week later, on a Saturday morning, he went in on his own time. And in under 2 hours, he was able to create the pediatric ready awareness simulation. And so he emails me like, hey, I created a thing in Acadicus. You might, just check it out. Let me know what you think, and I went in, it was amazing. It was almost a half an hour of in-depth knowledge about pediatric airway readiness, which is one of the most anxiety producing things that you can do in healthcare. And he did it in 2 hours, under 2 hours. And then he also did central venous catheter insertion, again, under 2 hours on his own time. And keep in mind, like, he's not like coming to our studio and working with our engineers to build this. He did this in his own home office on a Saturday morning on his free time. And he just put the headset on, created the environment. Now we had a pediatric ICU, which is sort of like how we're meeting halfway with experts, is we're creating the environment. So we're creating all the assets. It's not like he went in and modeled the bag valve mask and laryngoscope. We had all that stuff in there, but he was able to use that then to create his simulation in a very short amount of time.
So Toddy had the same question, but she's wondering too, are there metrics available about how long it takes to produce? You had said 2 minutes someone, doctor new to VR, I assume?
2 hours. Yeah.
So,
Yep.
and Toddy, that program looks a lot of fun, and it is very easy to place those objects and scale them and move them around. So yeah, 2-3 hours, definitely, I could see that.
And in another case, we had our experience with Dr. Bauman, per my previous sort of, background, he was really our subject matter expert. And again, it was that moment when we were in the fire department and he was teaching us a clinical skill that I wanted to figure out a way to just like encapsulate his knowledge. And so once we had Acadicus built, I invited him into our studio, and he does not have his own VR headset, but he used one of our headsets, put the headset on, we went into Acadicus, and I said, do you mind if I just record our conversation? Like, we'll just go through. And I hit record, and he had no training, he had no background, no understanding whatsoever about the tool set, but we were able to go through, and he created 3 different simulations in real time, impromptu, just off the top of his head. He says, like, let's talk about how to park ambulances at the scene of a disaster. Let's talk about how to set up for a basic clinical scenario. And he just said, hey, can you open up an exam room? I said, yeah, sure, here we go. And then we were in exam room. And he said, well, what about a tray? Can we get a tray? Can we get draping? Can we get the devices? Let's prototype an incise and drain. And he just off the top of his head, he's saying, like, now we're going to need a patient. We're going to need the patient sitting here. So I just pulled out a patient, put him on the table, and we were able to do that in real time. And he had no training or background in it at all. So it is pretty quick.
Nice. Let's see. And another question, Mark. All right, from Mark, do you need a strong programming background, or is the associated software more like WYSIWYG to create the outputs?
Yeah, definitely. No, you don't have to write a single line of code. That was the goal, is to make it really easy and intuitive. It's like you're going into it's like a sandbox. You go in and all the equipment's there. And the second video that we watch really shows what that editor is like, where all you do is open your menu and there's a list of different environments. You click load and then it's there, and that there's nothing else to it. And if you want to bring things into the room, you go to your assets menu. You've got all the assets there. We have a dynamic content delivery system. So when you initially download Acadicus, you don't have anything in your inventory, but you can go into our content store and just download, and most everything there is free right now. You just download content packs and bring those into your asset inventory. You just literally grab them from your menu, and you've got it in your hand, and you put it where you want it, and you hit save, and that's it.
I hate to say, for people who don't know what WYSIWYG is, it's what you see, what you get. But I'm going to make a really poor analogy. Those assets are like clip art or stock photos for your PowerPoint presentations. Only what he got is way cooler.
I should be clear too. I mentioned that we use Unity to build this, but you don't have to use Unity. Like we use it on our back end to create this application file, but it's sort of like you don't have to use you wouldn't have to use Unity at all. You just download Acadicus, and you're only opening Acadicus, and everything you need is in there. So there's no coding, you don't have to learn a game engine. You don't have to do any of that.
Excellent. Let's see, a couple questions answered. All right. And again, pop in with some questions in the chat, or use to ask the question box. Otherwise, John, do you want to play back that segment of the instructor going through the central
venous catheter insertion?
Yes.
Yeah, sure. There's a smaller segment that you had mentioned about, not the whole, because the whole thing is, I think, like a half an hour. So if you just play like a little segment of it, it might be good.
All right. So I got a clip. It's a minute and 25 seconds long. We'll go ahead and play that back. Then we get us set up here. And let me know in the chat of how this works. I'm trying something new.
Pick up our ultrasound again, and we can confirm with ultrasound view that the catheter is in the vein. Very easy to see it as a shadow entering the center of the internal jugular vein. Then again, we want to take our syringes, and as a double check, we're going to put a cap on that last lumen. We're going to draw blood out of the catheter, and then we're going to flush that central lumen, making sure we do not flush any air into the patient, get all the air bubbles up into the syringe, and then flush. We're going to repeat the same maneuver with our other syringes on our other 2 lumens. Draw blood, make sure it's got blood return, flush the line clean, make sure you don't inject any air bubbles. The last step in this procedure is going to be to secure the catheter. So hopefully you can see it in this video, but the catheter has 2 wings and a central piece across this hub. We're going to use suture, and I like to use 3/0 silk. This packet rips open. There's a curved needle, and with my needle driver, I'll grab the tip of that curved needle, and I'm going to go in the skin and come up through one of these wings. I'm going to do that on each side, and I'm going to put a 3rd stitch under the catheter and right across this little notch here. So the catheter is secured 1, 2, and 3 places. The 3rd
when you're in that VR environment, you can hop around, move around. You're not just limited to one spot. You can move around, and it makes for a really interesting experience watching that in the actual Acadicus room.
And there's some evidence that suggests that just being in virtual reality and having the agency to be able to move around and be in the space and interact with objects really increases your learning efficacy. People remember a lot longer than they would if they just watch a video. So a lot of people ask us, like, well, why don't I just watch a video? What's the difference? But anybody that's actually been in VR knows that there is a significant difference there. Like if you're in VR and you can stand there, it feels really immersive, like you're standing there with him, and being able to follow along increases your likelihood of remembering that and remembering it longer. And yeah.
Yeah, Brave New World. And let's see. Toddy asks, looks like VR experiences in Las Vegas or Santa Monica. So a little side conversation here. For John and for our newcomers in TLDC, we get a lot of side chat happening in the chat, and it actually makes for a really engaging conversation. Now let's see, another question. Question from Greg. Have you tried the Oculus Quest yet? Could it work with that?
Yes, we have an Oculus Quest. In fact, it's out of my reach right now, but I have it right here. It's amazing. The Quest is phenomenal. Again, right now you need a PC and you need a cord, with an Oculus Rift right now to use Acadicus. So we're currently focused on Oculus Rift and Oculus Rift S, but the Quest cuts the cord completely. It's wireless, so you don't have any PC, you don't have any cord, but you still have 6 degrees of freedom, which means you can move your controllers around, you have your hands, you can put out the headset. It's very immersive. But there's a really important point that needs to be made about the Quest, that the Quest has amazing experiences in it, but it's important to keep in mind that the developers that created that content have spent a substantial amount of time optimizing those experiences. And Oculus Quest is much more like a console. It's much more like an Xbox or a PlayStation in terms of developing for it. Whereas the Oculus Rift or Oculus Rift S is much more accessible for VR developers to create content. So Oculus Quest, you have to submit a design proposal to Oculus before you even start development. They encourage you to tell you what are they going to be building, what are you going to be building. Then they have to approve the process or approve the application, and it's because it's a mobile headset, it has a substantially reduced capability of rendering high quality graphics. So even though you can create very highly realistic environments, those are done by teams of experts that are spending extraordinary amounts of time optimizing every single little detail to get to that level of quality. So because we started with building very high fidelity assets and environments in Acadicus, we're still depending on the graphics card in a PC. So we need to have the Oculus Rift or the Oculus Rift S to do this. Eventually, at some point, I'm sure we could get this upgraded to Quest, but Quest is very much right now being oriented as a consumer and entertainment device. And I think it's got a lot of exciting potentials, and I use it all the time personally personally, but for enterprise and education, where you want to be demonstrating a concept or developing in real time, and you just want to be able to ship an application directly to people without going through that approval process, you're definitely going to be wanting to work with the Rift or the Rift S. We're having a lot of people. There's a couple of schools that we're working with that bought a lot of Quests, and they're finding that there just isn't a lot of educational content in it. There's some really cool educational applications in the Quest for sure, but there's a lot more, many times more applications available on the Rift.
I'm noticing that too. I'm doing research with the Oculus Quest, and it's hard trying to find educational content. There seems to be more educational content for the Go versus the Quest at this time.
Yep. Go is the same way. It's easier to deploy and build for. Yep. And then the thing with the Oculus Go is that it's only 3 degrees of freedom. So I don't want to get too technical, but you can only really move your head up, down, left, and right. And the controllers also, it's just a pointer. You can't like reach up and pick things up or move things around. It's just like a laser pointer that only moves on one axis. So it's great for watching Netflix or entertainment, or if you're going to be sort of observing something, but it's not as immersive as the 6 degrees of freedom you would get in an Oculus Rift. Where in 6 degrees of freedom is, again, you're not just moving up and down, left and right, but you can also move laterally, and then you also have your controllers that you can pick up and move around as well.
And hence me trying not to trip over stuff in VR.
That's right.
Or
putting the controllers down on a table in VR is another one of my favorites, where people finish the operation and then they just put the controllers down on the table, and there's no table there. It's a virtual table.
It's like a mic drop. Boom.
That's right. It happens all the time.
So we got a couple of questions. First, I got a question for Toddy. She says, so they're open source, but with oversight. Could you elaborate more on that, please? And John has a question. He asks, would you mind elaborating on your marketing and sales process, and what, if any, partner channel you have or are cultivating? P.S. We should circle back. Together we can do more.
Yeah, absolutely. What was the first question again? It was something about open source?
Oh, I'm asking Toddy for clarification on what open source means.
Oh, okay. Got it. Yeah, so our marketing and sales channels right now are... we're really at this point looking to establish our content marketplace. So right now the tools are all available. You can download, you can go in, it's free. I should emphasize that. You can go to acadicus.com and download it for free if you have an Oculus Rift. You can enter it right away and you can watch tutorials and you can get started. And we're looking for early pilot partners that are interested in creating instructional content. And even though the emphasis right now is on healthcare and medical, we have a lot of other industry partners that are creating content outside of that space. So we've got safety training. There's an interior designer that's using it for creating an interior design podcast in VR. And also looking for people interested in creating a VR podcast is something that we're pretty excited about, where all you have to do is get a couple of people in a space and put on the headsets, hit record, and you can actually record a fully immersive 3D podcast that then you can allow people to come in and watch later. They can go in, press play, and they can be standing there together with you. So that's kind of our early focus right now. But in terms of direct sales, we're going to medical sim centers are really our first beachhead or our initial market, because they're very familiar with using complex equipment. They're not at all afraid of VR and setting that up and getting it working. And then once that system is set up in a sim center, then faculty and instructors can get in there and they can try it and they can get an understanding of what the possibilities are and start using it, hopefully. And then also direct sales of the simulations that are created by experts. So in the case of the pediatric airway readiness or the central venous catheter insertion or emergency preparedness, those are simulations that are available for purchase now. And the revenue is then going to the instructor to motivate them to create more content. So they're able to make money creating VR simulations with Acadicus and then selling them through our marketplace.
Excellent. So Toddy clarified a question. She was talking about the marketplace submissions for Oculus, the oversight about what products are being accepted using the platforms.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, you have to submit. There's a process to submit. We've never gone through that before for the Oculus Quest. We're in the middle of an Oculus Go application that we're developing for the Madison Chamber of Commerce that we're submitting and going through the approval process. But it's sort of like working on an Apple device, like it's sort of like very different than, it's not like Android, it's more like Apple, where like they really want to know like what is the application, they vet every single application that goes into their stores.
Or you could open up your unit for developer mode, but that's getting into real geeky segments, so we won't go into that.
Right. Yep.
All right, so we got a question from Anne. Are you developing or thinking that this platform could be used as a testing environment, as in instructors being able to assess student learning?
Yes, absolutely. That's a great question, because what you can do is in simulation, and specifically, they have what's called debriefing and assessment. So what they'll do is they go in physical reality, they'll go into their sim center, they work with the mannequin, they do the simulation, but they're recording it with cameras all around the room. And even the students sometimes wear microphones, and they record everything that they're doing in that simulation. And then afterwards, they all leave the sim center, they go out to a classroom, and they watch their what they just did on a screen to watch how they did it. And then the instructor gives them feedback during that debriefing session on, the pulse went way up, but nobody noticed it, or this happened and you should have done this, or here you did the wrong thing. And they kind of do that debriefing. So in Acadicus, you can just record a student performance of a demonstration, and then the instructor can play that back later and assess their performance that way. So it's a very rich way of like having a student go in and demonstrate their competency at a given skill by recording themselves in 3D doing it, saving that into their library and sharing that with the instructor, so the instructor can then watch that. But then taking it one step farther, which is kind of hard to wrap our minds around right now, but the instructor can actually record themselves watching the student demonstration. So they can record themselves watching a recording, and it's sort of like dubbing in audio into a track, if you're familiar with that process, where, now you can have, and then the instructor can then submit that back to the student. And now the student goes into Acadicus and presses play, and they're seeing themselves doing the demonstration, but they're also seeing the instructor saying, okay, at this point, you should have done this, or you didn't do this right, or good job doing that. Good thing you noticed that, but next time, make sure you do this, or do this a little quicker. It shouldn't have taken you that long to do this. And it's a very rich way to sort of layer in that feedback. And even in multi-user demonstrations, I should be clear that Acadicus doesn't just record one person, it records everything happening in the room. So if there's 3 or 4 people working together on a procedure, it's going to be recording everything everybody's saying and doing. And it's a very rich kind of 3D immersive recording that you then capture.
Yeah, that is really nuts when you got 4 people in the same room and you record and you re-record with the same 4 people in the room and watch your recording. It's very meta. But
I always have to warn people that when we do that, they're going to have very weird dreams that night.
All right, so it looks like we got a lot of questions answered. We got 5 minutes remaining, so if you have any more questions, go ahead and pop them in the chat, drop them in, ask a question. But John, you're doing something later today that requires Oculus Rift? Are you still doing that?
Not today. No, we're going to be doing. We decided to schedule that for another time. The physician that was going to be facilitating that couldn't make it, so we're rescheduling that.
Okay. And can you tell us what that was going to be?
Yeah, so right now we've got the way of being able to record a demonstration the way we watched in those videos. However, there's a whole other opportunity to host real-time workshops. So we're going to have some of these expert instructors coming in and hosting events where students can join that are also interested in that topic, and they can be together in real time. So not just watching a video of an instruction that was created previously, but actually having the instructor there and saying, okay, everybody gather around, we're going to be going over this specific procedure, and everybody follow along. And then after we do this, then everybody gets to try it themselves. And so we're going to be doing kind of real-time workshops, and that's one of the things I'm most excited about. I think coming from the Second Life background is this community aspect of it. I'm excited about the opportunities to just create a VR simulation people can learn from, but I think it's even more interesting once we get students, especially students across geographic distance, students working from different schools, different institutions, that are able to come together and compare notes and collaborate and learn from each other. And so we're creating these what we're calling Acadicus learning spaces right now, where when you go to the pediatric airway readiness, you're not just getting that simulation that Dr. Slayman created, but you're also getting access to a community space. So communities can even, students could meet there together. They could meet with physicians. Experts can host workshops, and that's kind of the goal of that event.
And how could people find out about this live workshop?
Yeah, so subscribing to our newsletter, we have on our webpage, it's a little bit hard to find right now, but if you scroll on the main Acadicus.com homepage, there's a newsletter subscription or sign up form about halfway down.
Okay.
Next to the award-winning VR training simulation, there's an Acadicus newsletter. That's the place to do it. We need to get that like more front and center, that newsletter. Or even better yet, if you register for Acadicus, you just sign up and download Acadicus, then you'll get those notifications as well.
All right. Last question of the day. And this was an open-ended question. This is a good question. Any other thoughts on the future of where the tech is headed?
That is a very good question. I think it's really absorbing a lot of things that I'm most excited about, how VR and virtual technologies can absorb things that currently require physical proximity and physical objects to be able to do it. So I think the digital technology sort of is pulling these things into the digital realm. And right now we're kind of catching physical reality. Like I'm trying to catch up with medical simulation with Acadicus. We're trying to get it up to that level. But I think once we get there, we're going to be able to do things that you just can't physically do right now. And so things like the best use case would be like somebody that's in a rural hospital or somewhere in rural Montana or remote parts of the world that don't otherwise have access to any of this training. Now with a $399 headset and a PC, you have access to the best of the best knowledge created by experts potentially, as we get going. And I think that's a game changer. I mean, you can't overstate the possibilities for that when, somebody that doesn't otherwise have access to mannequins or experts or instructors or any of that. And there are so many schools that don't have sim centers because they cost so much money. And so it's not about like replacing sim centers. It's just about making what works in sim centers more accessible to others. And I think that's really exciting. And then kind of just full circle back to my architectural background, I think there's a whole lot of what we do in physical reality that's entirely unnecessary. All the commuting and travel and physical and the resources that go into most physical interactions is wasteful and unnecessary with what's coming with virtual reality. And again, it's not about replacing physical interaction. It's about making the time that we do spend together that much more rich and meaningful by replacing all the time we're spending in our cars commuting just to go sit together and watch PowerPoints and look at our computers anyway. Let's do those things in virtual reality where we can feel a sense of presence and we can connect in virtual worlds and we can do things we can't do in physical reality across geographic distances. That's impossible, currently. I think we can only barely understand what's coming, and it's going to be very exciting, and that's what I'm looking forward to.
All right. Thank you, John. How could other people get a hold of you?
So my email is the contact form on our on acadicus.com. If you go to the contact form, that'll come directly to me. So that would be a great way to reach out directly. I think somebody posted my Twitter handle earlier. Oh, you did? Yep. So Twitter is another great way to connect. And yeah.
All right. So I'm going to post in the chat your Twitter as well as Arch Virtual.
Great.
And Acadicus. I got so many tabs open right now.
I forgot all about my Jon Brouchoud Twitter handle. I don't think I've been updating that. My Arch Virtual one is more current, and then there's a Acadicus one.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate this opportunity. This has been great.
And to everyone, have a great weekend. If you're out in the Midwest or East Coast, stay cool out there. And we'll see you until next time. Thanks, John.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.